Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Anthony Cosenza with the Orange and Black Insider. Hope you are enjoying the last couple of weeks of shopping until Christmas and getting all of your shopping done. We are on episode 20 of this show, and the Bengals are on a 2-game win streak. We're recording on a different night tonight. It's actually Tuesday night, just due to some schedule conflicts between myself and the co-host this week. So for those of you tuning in live, and you also get an extra day to download the podcast. So there's an early Christmas present for you. Unfortunately, Connor Howe couldn't join us this evening, but I am joined by Scott Schultze over in Ohio. Scott, how are things? You've had a little time away from your other job aside from the website, but are you getting your shopping done? Are you getting geared up for the holiday? I know you're the traditional, was it St. Nicholas?
St. Nick's Day's past. We got our St. Nick's gifts. Our son is still enjoying the things he got. And actually, one of the things he got was food, and he's been asking for more of it after he finished it. But right now, we're just digging out actually, I guess this whole area got snow. So we got, I think since it got a little bit, we got a few inches. I think as you go north up to the Lake Erie, I think they got maybe a foot or so. So we're just enjoying winter a little early, or Christmas a little early.
So when you say food, are you saying like candy, or are you saying like actual?
Yeah, it was candy. It was like little snack things.
Okay. All right.
He has a sweet tooth like I do.
Yeah, I do. You and I have talked about that a little bit. Yep.
Yeah, we still need to have our episode about ice cream.
We're gonna do it. I promise you, we're gonna do it, and we'll talk about that. I know that's your passion segment, and I will let you run with that one, buddy. But as I mentioned, the Bengals are now on a 2-game win streak. They beat the Eagles last week, and then this Sunday they went to Cleveland and put it to the Browns 23-10, and score probably could have been a little higher given some of the issues. But Scott, if you remember last week on the show, I had mentioned I was a little afraid of this game just because of a lot of things that seemed to be going into the Browns' corner, which is off a bye week, at home, bad weather, Robert Griffin III getting a start, the team starving for a win this year, and the Bengals hadn't been playing extremely well really this entire year. So I was a little worried about it, but the Bengals took care of business. We'll kind of talk about a couple of aspects, but real quick, your best and worst from the game, what you liked and what you didn't like out of the Bengals in their 23-10 win over the Browns.
Well, I think one of the best things I liked was kind of the thing you had talked about last week regarding how all the indications seem to be this could have been a trap game, could have been where something snuck up on them with AJ Green out, the Browns having Hugh Jackson. It just seems like the kind of game that if they were to lose one on the road, sometimes they struggle with those kind of games where you expect they should win. And they came out and dominated. Like you said, they could have been more points. Obviously, we still had Nugent, so there's a point there. There's actually almost turning it into -2 points for us when they returned.
Well, yeah, and then he also missed the other field goal, so right before the half. Yeah, so there's 4 points.
Yeah, and but it was nice to see that, you're supposed to be a team that was in playoff contention playing against an 0-13, probably an 0-16 team this year. You're supposed to beat that team. And essentially they did. I mean, they pretty much handled them the whole game. RG3 looked like the RG3 who's been sitting on the bench the last few years. So, yeah, all in all, they did everything you would expect them to do. They dominated a bad team. And the guys who had to step up, stepped up. The running backs, had efficient games. Boyd seemed to be our new AJ Green. Just make every pass went to him, and just everything you wanted to see, you saw. So it was a good performance all around, I thought.
Yeah, it was. I was pretty pleased with it, especially as like what we're talking about is just it seemed like such a trap game, and when the Bengals need to win out the rest of the year to have a shot at the playoffs here, and they do still have a small pulse in the playoffs, which is good. Especially with the game coming over the last 3 games are all difficult games, so they need to keep winning and get that confidence built up. So I liked what I saw. I liked the running game. The secondary absolutely clamped down on everything. I think part of that had to do with the weather, the wind, the kind of off and on snow and just some of the conditions there. But Anytime RG3 tried to throw the ball deep, there were defensive backs swarmed all over a receiver. He had 104 passing yards, which is just, that's indicative of the Bengals secondary really doing their job well. There are a couple things, I like the run game, as I mentioned. I thought Andy Dalton played really well. Tyler Eifert made a couple of nice red zone plays, and there's a lot to like here. But if I'm going to nitpick, I don't like the pass protection. I didn't obviously like what I saw from Nugent, but there's some news on that. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. But when your next 3 games, and you need to win out, when your next 3 games are against the defenses of Pittsburgh, Houston, and Baltimore, you have to protect the quarterback. And the Cleveland Browns were dead last in the league in quarterback sacks going into last week, and the Bengals offensive line allowed 4. Now, I think I saw Andy Dalton run into one that probably shouldn't have been a sack, maybe even 2. But even still, you cannot let your quarterback get sacked 2+ times, a game, and figure that you're going to be a playoff team and make some noise in the playoffs. So the Bengals need to start figuring some things out along the offensive line as the weeks go by. But all in all, like you said, they came out victorious, and they took care of business that they needed to, and that was a good sign for things to come, I guess. But I kind of want to ask you, what's that?
What I mentioned. You mentioned the offensive line. The defensive line would be one thing I would nitpick too, as far as the battle in the trenches with the upcoming games.
Yeah.
Isaiah Crowell hadn't done anything since week 4 or 5. There were multiple times in the second half where he just had these huge lanes he was running in, and yeah, it's very hard when you look at some of the teams you have coming up, especially the next game, where you lose that game, you're kind of done. And if you can't stop Isaiah Crowell, your odds of stopping Le'Veon Bell, you can, but it's not an easy task. And and they just seem to, for whatever reason this year, when it comes to stopping a running back, they are very hit and miss. And that was definitely the one disappointment I thought was. And even the first time they played the Browns, they let that quarterback Kessler run.
Oh, it was Kevin Hogan. Yeah.
Or Hogan. Yeah. It wasn't. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's also indicative of, we've talked about the lack of overall team speed, especially at the linebacker position. I mean, the one thing RG3 did well is run that read option, and he did some plays with his legs, and unfortunately the Bengals still have yet to kind of figure out some things in the run game, whether it's an active quarterback that can make some plays with his legs, or Crowell. And you know what, Scott, I did a little research. Crowell, even as a rotational back, he's actually had some really good games against the Bengals. He's dating back to 2014 when he was a rookie, and that Browns team was actually a little bit of a surprise. And they they kind of used a multi-dimensional attack with running backs that year. But at any rate, there's going to be some bad things, and there was the good far outweighed the bad, which is awesome. And the Bengals got their 5th win of the year. They're 5-7-1, and it looks as if they're going to make the playoffs, they need to win out these next 3 games and obviously get some help. They got a little bit of help this last week on Monday night with the Patriots beating the Ravens. They did not get help from the Buffalo Bills as they lost to the Steelers, the team the Bengals host this Thursday, and we'll be previewing that game in just a little bit here. That being said, real quick, Scott, the Bengals are on a 2-game winning streak. And I believe, I don't have the records in front of me, but it's against the Eagles and the Browns. I believe obviously the Browns are winless, so they don't have any wins, but I think the Eagles have 4 or 5 wins currently.
I think teams are 5-21 combined.
Yeah. So not all that impressive in terms of the teams they're playing, but they're games you need to win. And, they basically dominated both teams, even though there were some issues popping up in both from the Bengals. Now, do you take, as the Bengals try and maybe turn this season around and make an unlikely playoff push, do you take this 2-game win streak as, you know what, we're starting to see Vontaze Burfict and company play better ball. You're starting to see the secondary clamp down on the outside receivers. There's a little bit, it's still not that great, but there's a little bit better pass rush over the past couple of weeks. Are you seeing this 2-game win streak as a sign of, you know what, they very well could win out and sneak into the playoffs? Or is it just kind of like, this is vintage Marvin Lewis getting some decent wins at the end of a year that seems to be somewhat lost, and they're the games you're supposed to win, be it, you're being favored, and they're at 10 a.m. on a Sunday afternoon, 1 p.m. Eastern on a Sunday afternoon. Is it just they're winning games they should win, or is this, hey, we're building momentum and we're going to make a push here?
This game, they actually remind me a lot of my alma mater, who is a kind of a mid-major basketball school. They play a lot of games against, decent teams, comparable teams, or, kind of like the lower, teams that are like, I don't know, in the Sun Belt or the SWAC or something. And, they beat those teams by like 20, 30 points. And you're like, yeah, these guys, we finally got it together this year. We're doing some good stuff. And then they'll play a team who is a little better than them. But you're, okay, we're 15-2 or whatever. This is a team we're going to beat. They just look like a totally different team. They can't rebound. They can't hit free throws. And and what you see with a lot of anyone who follows college basketball at the mid majors, once they face those big schools, you get your big upsets, but a lot of times they just don't have their best games. And what it is they're just facing a different level of competition. And with the Bengals, a lot of people were saying even at the beginning of the year, in the middle of the year, their schedule's very front loaded. They have a lot of tough games early on. As the year progresses, It gets a lot easier. And I think we're seeing that is, okay, yeah, it definitely got easier. Unfortunately, we didn't win all those games that we were supposed to that were a little easier, but at least we've won the last two. And so it's nice to see that, yeah, you are beating the teams that you definitely should beat. You should have beaten some more teams you should have beat, but at least you're beating some of them. Although at this point now, I think it's where you get a lot of the disagreement from the Bengals fans, especially on our Cincy Jungle page. You have some of the discussion of, well, at this point, is it really worth it? Because you kind of have, okay, you're more or less out of the playoffs. So when you win at that point, you're just kind of giving yourself a lower chance at a really good draft pick. Like last year when the guy who was supposed to go number 1 overall, Tunsil, and they had the picture of him smoking pot right before the draft and he fell.
Yep.
Well, if you finish up, if the Bengals, finish up not winning any more games or win one more game, if something like that happens, you're in contention to grab someone like that. If, they went out and ended up 7-8-1 or whatever, well, okay, now you've missed out on him and you're getting, a decent guy, but, kind of a mid first round, kind of a pick that really isn't there. And you could argue, well, but you still have that sliver of playoff hope. And that's kind of like it's almost like that Big Bang thing where, okay, the odds of nothing turning into something and, over billions of years spontaneously, this boom, you get these elements that pop out of nothing and they slowly turn into this and turn into that and turn into this and turn to life. And like they say, the mathematical odds of that are something like, 1 in 100, I don't know, I'm making up a number, bazillion, trillion, whatever, so many zeros after it that it's like theoretically impossible. The Bengals playoff odds seem like that where, yeah, it could happen, but the odds are just so astronomically small that as a fan, I can see why people would say, yeah, let's just, at this point, put the young guys in. If we lose, we lose. Let's get that high pick, reset, play for next year. I know the team isn't going to want to do that. Lewis isn't going to want to do that. But ultimately, I would say it does seem more like fool's gold because you are playing the easier second half schedule and you're kind of out of playoff contention. So you're just kind of, yeah, typical. It's almost like a Jeff Fisher season, 7-9.
Yeah. Who, by the way, just got fired after a recent contract extension. So, there are other teams experiencing not only coaching issues, but a lot of other issues as well that the Bengals have also kind of, in a way, suffered this year. But I agree with you in the fool's gold sense, just because, these are games they should win, as we mentioned, but I just wonder now if they kind of feel like, what, even though I'm just kind of curious of what their mindset is, in that locker room. Is that locker room and the coaching staff saying, you know what? We went out, we get a little help, we're in, and we're really fighting to do what we can to make the playoffs? Or is it, you know what? If we make the playoffs, we make it, and we've shot ourselves in the foot early, but now we can play a little more loose. We can go out and start playing a different type of football than that we saw early in the season, where maybe the expectations of this team and what they could do were so high. An encouraging thing is that AJ Green might be coming back this week or very soon, which he's slated to practice this week, which is good. So I don't know. I see both, like you. I see both sides of the argument. I see a team that if they end up winning out, or come close to winning out, I would say it's not fool's gold, especially if two of the wins are against Baltimore and Pittsburgh. I don't know. I because this team has not won the games in prime time the way that other teams have done. I just wonder if these are games against weaker teams in a venue and time that just plays to their strengths a bit more. But like I said, the Bengals host the Steelers and the Ravens before the season is done. And if they can win those games, as well as those two games are sandwiched around a big Christmas Eve primetime game against the Texans, then that's going to be it'll tell a lot about this team. It'll tell a lot about this team.
Looking forward is week 17. I think Cleveland is going to Pittsburgh, and if Pittsburgh wins that game, I think the Bengals are essentially done. So that's why I'm kind of thinking the odds are as bad as they looked against the Bengals in Cleveland. Anything can happen. The Steelers plane, I don't know if they take a plane for that short of a trip. The bus could get a flat tire or something on the way there.
Right.
And so they have to play they have to grab a Kent State or someone to fill in for them. But barring something like that, it just seems like it's almost like the idea you're going, even if they run the table, let's say the Ravens fall flat, like a lot of people kind of figured they would because their schedule was very easy early on. And let's say Pittsburgh does lose the next two, that week 17 just seems like it. Yeah, that Steelers-Browns game, I think would be the one that you'd be putting all your hopes on and just win it. It's kind of like Empire Strikes Back. If you've ever seen Star Wars, the second, but the good ones. There's a scene when they're battling in the snow on the planet of Hoth that these rebels are just getting their butts kicked, and they're in the trench, and they're shooting their little ineffective lasers at these big Imperial walkers, and then they take the snow speeder and it puts out the little tow cable and it wraps the one down that falls over. And as soon as the one falls down, you're being attacked by half a dozen or more of these things. One of them falls down and the guy's like, yeah, and they all jump out of the trench and run at this thing, which is totally absurd because, you still have a whole bunch of these other ones coming at you. And I think it's kind of like that I don't want to be the guy jumping out yeah, we beat the Browns. Yeah, let's, run. Let's, jump out of our safety spot, run through this open field, as clear targets as all these other things are just coming right at us. So I'm kind of the guy who's no, I'll just stay here in the trench right now and keep shooting because, I'm not quite ready to get all excited because we knocked one thing down.
Right. And I love the analogy. You're the king of the analogies on this show, man. I love it. The one thing about that Browns Steelers game at the end of the year, it's going to be really interesting if the Browns don't have a win yet at that point in the season. And if the Steelers, lost the next two, if they lose to the Bengals and then lose the week after that, and they're sitting at 8 wins and they host the winless Browns, and the Browns have given the Steelers some fits, even though the Steelers have won the games for the most part over the last handful of years, the Browns still give the Steelers fits, and it would be very interesting if they do not have a win yet on the season and they go and play the Steelers and they are just dying to get that one win so they don't finish the season winless. I would be very interested to see the effort level that they would put against Pittsburgh to make sure that they don't go winless. But the Bengals have to take care of more business ahead of them if they do want to make the playoffs. As you mentioned, it's possible, but at this point, the percentage is pretty slim. We're going to transition into some news and notes here in just a second, but if you are not downloading this show, if you're not listening to this show, you're missing out on Bengals talk and Star Wars talk. I don't know what else you want from this show. I mean, if you get both of those things in one show, that's got, I mean, for a lot of people, that's got to be just right up your alley. So download us on iTunes. We are there. You can also subscribe and download our content on YouTube and SoundCloud. We have channels there. You can get in touch with the show on Twitter at BengalsOBI. And you can also email us, theobinsider@gmail.com, with questions, comments, all of that good stuff. Leave ratings, if you will, on iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud. We love to get some feedback, and we appreciate everyone who is not only, we've got some people tuning in live once again, and we appreciate them, as well as all of the interaction we've received through those platforms. And one other medium you can check us out on, as always, is through SB Nation's Cincy Jungle website. We're on there, and we tend to post the show there and then splice it up and throw a couple of different posts there. So check all of that out, if you will. We appreciate the support, and we'll keep feeding you content as long as you guys want it. So once again, appreciate it. That being said, Scott, some major news hit the Bengals, aside from A.J. Green potentially practicing this week. The Bengals finally made a move on Tuesday that a lot of people have been begging for and maybe even expecting for a long time, not only in 2016, but really over the past couple of years. Bengals kicker Mike Nugent has been released, and the team has signed Randy Bullock, a guy I believe they brought in for a tryout a handful of weeks ago after Nugent was already struggling. So aside from getting your general thoughts on the move, Scott, I just want to point light on some things that have been talked about with this move, okay? So when the Bengals went through a really tough patch this season, we're really looking at weeks 8 through 12, and obviously there's a bye week in there on week 9. So in weeks 8 through 12, the team was 0-3-1, okay? Obviously, the tie against Washington, you had an extra point missed by Nugent in that one. And a field goal missed in that one. So there's anywhere from 1 to 4 points that could have or should have been made in that game. Then you look at the loss in Buffalo. He missed 2 extra points in that one, and that was a loss 12 to 16. And then you look at the loss in Baltimore. He once again missed an extra point, and that's a 19 to 14 end result there. So, obviously those making those points and hitting those kicks changes game plans by a team based on, especially that Buffalo game. He hits both those extra points. The Bengals, when they're driving late, they're trying to get a field goal and not trying to get a touchdown. So, and then you look at the tie, that could be a win if he hits those kicks. So my question to you is, aside from liking the move and is it too late, my question to you is, do you blame almost strictly Mike Nugent for those losses because of those narrow margins and those kicks he missed? Or are you one of those guys that says, obviously it's a team sport, a lot of things happen in the game, and there's a lot of other pieces that contribute to a win or a loss?
I definitely would fall in the second camp. There's a lot of things that play into. I think his inabilities definitely have been a key attribute in that, but I can't say it's just that. And even if you go back to that game against Carolina a few years ago, I thought after that game, when he missed the kick and that led to the tie instead of a win, that would have been the thing that led him where they said, okay, it's time to move on, because it wasn't like he's been a great kicker for the Bengals and just got bad this year. He's basically, after his first year, he's basically been a 79, 81% field goal kicker, kind of below league average. So you'd think, every year, I think people kind of figured, okay, this is the year he's gone. This is the year he's gone. Or this is the year we're bringing in an actual person to compete with him. And usually the guys that would bring in to compete were undrafted free agents, but from college, but usually not even like the top tier. They'd be like the second level guys, like the guys who, weren't even really considered to be draftable. But like the Tom Oberskis and some of these folks, that Zach Hawker, that, weren't considered the top 5 or 6 kickers that year, but just someone they're bringing in, or John Brown, who had never kicked in college at all. So then most people, yeah, we're just going to, Nugent's our guy. We're just going to bring someone else in to just to have someone there to kind of save his leg during preseason or whatever. So I think there have been so many times where you would have thought, this is the time we're getting rid of him. And even a few weeks ago when he started missing all his extra points, okay, now they're going to get rid of him. Nope, he's our kicker. And then the week after that, the week after that. Yeah. And so by the time they finally get rid of him, I think most people were just so amazed that when I first saw it, I thought it was kind of a joke. I didn't believe it. I thought someone was just, I thought the headline was, should they cut him or they should cut him? And then I realized, oh, wow, they did. Because, you can only see that so many times before you just figure, well, they're just never going to get rid of the guy. I think the same thing with Marvin Lewis, too. I think we've talked about this the last couple of weeks that neither me or Connor expect Marvin Lewis to be let go. And if he were to be let go at some point in the next month, I think we'd all be surprised just because you just don't get that impression from Mike Brown that that's ever going to happen. So, yeah, I'd say it definitely seems like a move that they had to make, only because you just can't miss, that many kicks. And it's interesting. I've heard some people talking about like the pros and cons, and one thing that kind of troubled me a little bit was when Marvin Lewis mentioned it. He talked about how difficult of a move it was to cut the guy. And my personal opinion is if your kicker is that bad, and as you mentioned, a lot of these games you're in situations where you're costing your team, a chance to win, a chance to drive, a chance for that, to either get that victory or get those extra points, before the end of half or something that they just don't have. And that shouldn't be a difficult decision that should be one of the easiest decisions that a head coach ever has to make, that this guy is costing my team. He's been bad for year after year. We just have, and I can see, okay, you're saying it might be, maybe it's a hard decision because you like the guy, but it is a business. You kind of have to look at it the way you look at fantasy football. Unfortunately, that, if you cut a guy from your fantasy team, you don't have any hard feelings. You're just, he's not performing. I need to move on. And unfortunately, that's what, pro sports is. It's a very rough, you're expecting the highest level, and if they can't deliver, the teams that win, that's what they do. They make these kind of moves all the time. If they have guys that underperform, and that's the one thing that I think a lot of people have complained about with the Bengals is they sometimes will hold on these folks a little too long because they're good people, they're good in the locker room, they get along well. Yeah. Mike Brown. They
don't rock the boat. Yeah.
Yeah, you send them Christmas cards. I'm sure they send you Christmas cards. You go to their kid's baptism or whatever, first communion, or I don't know, and you get together and maybe go to the lake and go fishing or something. But at the end of the day, that's not what a football team is. It's nice they get along and that you want to keep these guys around, but you can still hang out with them after you cut them and send them packing. And you mentioned some of the losses recently. I even think the playoff game last year, in some way, I think at least when it happened, I thought Nugent had a part to play, only because you look at what they were doing at the end of the game. When they got the interception, they had the ball. They're up by a few points. A field goal would have put them up by a touchdown, or where Pittsburgh had to go down and score a touchdown. They were right around, I think it would have been like maybe a 45-yarder or something like that. And if you had a good kicker, okay, we're just going to we're going to milk the clock. We're going to try to, get the clock down to about as low as we can. We're going to try, get it down to where maybe it's like a long 30-yard field goal. Instead, because you have Nugent, you can't do that. You have to be more aggressive. You have to try to get those yards. And so that was what Hill did. We know what happened after that. But I think if they had someone like a Justin Tucker or Steven Gostkowski, it would have been a different play call, possibly a different strategy, and they could have played for the field goal in that situation, and not felt they had to get the extra 20 yards or whatever to get in Nugent's range.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The one thing I will say is the guy they grabbed kind of surprised me. Bullock. I would have preferred one of the undrafted guys, like that Karimi guy from UCLA or Martin from Duke, or the guy who I really liked was Craddock from Maryland. in the last draft. So I thought one of those guys would have been a nice choice because it's a chance to look at, when you're 5-7-1, it's a chance to look at your younger guys. Kind of what we're doing with Boyd and Core.
Yep.
Look at a younger kicker, see what he can do. Instead, they grab a retread, a guy who wasn't really that spectacular at Texas A&M. Never had the long. I think he only had one field goal around 50 yards his whole career in college. In the pros, I think he hasn't had a 50-yarder since his first or second year with the Texans. He's been decent, not great, and unfortunately, it seems to be a Bengals type of guy. Yeah, a Wallace Gilberry kind of a guy. Yeah, he's decent, not great. We know what we're getting with him. And if they were, 10-5, I think that'd make a lot of sense. But when you're staring at the record they have, that's the one thing I would have preferred to see is someone maybe a little less proven with a little more upside.
So I'm going to ask you a question on that in just a second, and it was a question I had, and Andrew in our YouTube chat room was reading my mind on this one. But before I get to that question, I just have a couple of overarching thoughts just about this move and kickers in general. And you make an interesting point, Scott, about the undrafted rookie free agents and maybe test a guy that doesn't have pro experience. One thing that sticks out to me, both with Nugent and his tenure with the Bengals and them signing Bullock, is there's this weird thing in the NFL, this stale stew, if you will, of kickers that just keep getting recycled through all these different teams. And some of these guys are not even that great. They've had flash in the pan seasons. They've been, like Nugent himself, I believe was a second-round draft pick years ago. It's just, to me, I don't understand why there isn't more of an influx of these young legs. Now, I get, the pressure and potentially that, if they're 20, 21 years old when they enter the NFL, obviously they may have some physical growing to do and some leg strength issues, whatever. But it's just weird to me that there's just this weird recycling situation that happens with these kickers, including Randy Bullock, the guy the Bengals signed in place of Nugent. The other thing that sticks out to me is, I'm going to kind of piggyback on what you said, Scott, with the Bullock signing. That is very, very much a Marvin Lewis, Bengals, stick in the comfort zone, get a veteran guy that you know what you're going to get from, as you said. I guess he's probably one of the best of what's left out there in terms of veteran kickers, but there might be a hidden gem out there that is the next Justin Tucker and one of these young guys that you mentioned. And, they also had a chance to get Kai Forbath weeks ago when they brought him in for a tryout. And that was one of the guys that I really liked of the group that they brought in. And the Vikings, who had kicking issues and are looking to make the playoffs, pounced on him. And they pounced on him at a time that they needed to. So that leads to my question, and the question also provided by Andrew in our YouTube chat room. What do you make of the timing of this move? Because I think obviously there's one mindset that says, well, now that they've won the last two games, they really are in playoff push mode, and now they're kind of saying we can't sacrifice more points in any of these games coming up if we want to make an improbable push to the playoffs. Or do you say, based on some of the stats in those games in the middle of the season I gave you earlier, do you kind of say this is too little too late?
Definitely there's two ways they could have approached this. I think one is if you said, okay, the season, yeah, we're kind of out of it realistically. This guy's obviously costing us much more than we're getting from him. We just need to move on. But I think if you're in the position where you kind of resign yourself that, yeah, we're not really in the playoff hunt, which I think realistically they probably aren't. I can't imagine you cut him and then just grab a guy who is Nugent 2.0, guy who isn't having as horrible of a season, who doesn't have as bad of a track record, but isn't exactly, a guy with a huge upside. He's, kind of a journeyman that's kind of bounced around, and almost kind of reminds me when they grabbed Nugent the first time. And I just kind of wonder, and even Shane Graham was kind of like that. Guys who had kind of been around, no one really wanted, and they just kind of stuck. Nugent had a good very first year with the Bengals. He turned that into a 7-year career, and based on one good season. And Graham obviously stuck around for a while. He had a guy who'd been in the league before he got the Bengals and had kind of, I think he had been cut, kind of bounced, ended up with Cincinnati. And I don't know if they are just expecting that. Yeah, we'll just grab another veteran and hope it kind of sticks. And I will say, if you remember when Nugent got hurt a few years ago, they grabbed some guys mid-season. They grabbed some horrible, just
one guy.
College.
Not to interrupt you, but one guy they did get, and one I think Nugent had 2 seasons where he ended the season on IR. If you remember, Josh Brown was one that they brought in, and he had an incredible season for them. Now we know that we now know. Yeah, we now know. Who the kind of guy Josh Brown is, given some reports that are out there. But I mean, from a kicking standpoint, he really helped the Bengals out a lot in Nugent's absence. But I do know, if you remember this name, Clint Stitzer was a guy I think that they brought in.
I think was he the one from Ohio State?
I don't remember exactly where he went, but
I think from Ohio State, I think too. And
Petton, They were
both unproven guys, and I think that might have played into it. If you look at whenever we bring an unproven guy, or when they draft a guy, they drafted Neil Rackers, Doug Pelfrey. They were horrible. So I can see why Mike Brown would be scared of wanting to bring in an unproven commodity, because every time he closes his eyes and reaches his hand in that bag, it just he grabs nothing of any value. And they have had some success grabbing a retread. Although that being said, they someone like a Bullock does have a limited upside. Doesn't have a booming kick. I'm trying to think of. He doesn't have a good track record with long field goals, I guess would be what I was trying to say. And so you kind of know that he's kind of been around, had trouble sticking, and you kind of wonder, do they think they're in a playoff hunt? Because if they weren't in a playoff hunt, I would have liked to see them grab one of these Ross Martin type of guys who didn't make a team, or heck, even that Kick-alicious guy from a couple years ago. Just something, someone with some upside, just to see, why not? I mean, at this point, you're just trying to see what you can find. So it kind of makes me wonder, okay, do you grab a guy like Bullock because you think you're in the playoff hunt and you need to have that proven veteran where you're going to get that, 80-85% field goal accuracy, but nothing great, but you're going to have this decent guy? Or is it just because you're Mike Brown and you don't want to take that risk, because every time you do, it bites you in the hand?
Yeah, I'm with you on all of that. I do think that I think both it is too late, or it's later than it should be when this move has been made. And I hate to say it. Nugent seems like a good guy. He's done a lot for the community, but I mean, at some point, if you're not doing your job, you're not doing your job. And there's some discussion in our chat room about it probably being a mental thing. And, I think at this point, some of those extra points and all of that stuff, I mean, it just seems to be really at this point a mental thing. So last week, the extra point he did miss was on that was a bad snap, bad hold. But, at some point, you just kind of got to say this just isn't working. And the Bengals did it a little later than I would have liked. However, they did get a guy who, might provide a spark. He kicked for the Steelers this year, so maybe the fact that he's a division guy, he was 3 of 3 and 1 of 1 on extra points and stuff, but other than that, it's kind of like maybe it's just a guy who can maybe he's not going to make the big long 55-yard kicks with regularity, but maybe he's the guy who can really steady the extra point situation at least, and get the team these points that they need in these. I mean, so many of these losses have been close games, and you got to get every point you can. And I also think, as I'm sure Nugent was liked by the teammates and all of that, but I mean, I know from a fan standpoint that when I watch the game, at some point now, it's kind of like every time Nugent went back there for an extra point or a field goal, you're kind of like biting your nails. And I'm sure the players kind of are sitting there doing the same thing. So,
and I'll admit, I got kind of tired of making score predictions in our podcasts each week and having to deduct points for extra points. I'd like to predict 7s and not 6s.
Right. So, no, go ahead.
It is interesting. I think one other thing that's interesting is since, we're a few weeks in Advent with Christmas coming up, the whole idea of firing, basically they fired a guy right before Christmas, which I never would have expected Mike Brown to do it, as loyal as he has been to some of his players.
Yep. And that's been the, I mean, you say that tongue in cheek, and I mean, we're both kind of smiling and chuckling at that, but I mean, that's been the knock on Mike Brown, and it was a knock on his dad. I mean, even though Paul Brown was known as a much better coach and owner and all that stuff, not only for the Bengals, but before the Bengals franchise, I mean, that's been a knock. They play favorites and they keep guys that, I mean, Robert Gather, the list goes on and on. I mean, there's
like so versus,
Bill Walsh, right? Yeah. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I mean, it's just, that's kind of how this franchise operates. And sometimes it works out great for them. And other times it totally bites them. And, this is probably the longest conversation ever in recorded history about a kicker, but it's been such a hot button topic, really for the last couple of years. The two most divisive players on the Bengals roster over the last handful of years have been Brandon Tate and Mike Nugent, and both were released this year, finally in 2016. And now Randy Bullock is in place for Nugent, and let's hope, as the Bengals potentially try and win these next 3 games of the season here and try and make the playoffs, let's hope that there's a better result with Bullock instead of Nugent. What are your thoughts, Bengals fans? We've got a number of people that are already chatting it up in our YouTube chat room, so thank you to you guys. Are you excited about the move? Are you apprehensive? Or are you just kind of throwing your hands up and saying, it is what it is, and it's kind of replacing one guy for another guy, and it's too little too late? We'd love to hear some feedback. You can get in touch with us on Twitter, as I mentioned earlier, at BengalsOBI. You can email us, theobinsider@gmail.com. Download all of our content. You can see it on Cincy Jungle and stream it through there. You can get it on iTunes. You can get it through our YouTube and SoundCloud channels. So please check us out. We appreciate it. And we're getting more and more people every week in the live chat as we do that. So we want to encourage you to join us for that, even though, sometimes a couple times we've been on Tuesday, sometimes we've been on Wednesday night, but please join us if and when you can. We'd love to have you. We'd love to interact with you and take your questions on this show. That being said, the Bengals have a gigantic game against the Steelers. And when you look at the Bengals record, 5-7-1, and the Steelers are now, I believe, 8-5. When you look at it, 5-7-1 doesn't really necessarily indicate a huge game, but we've said it a couple times already on this episode, because the Bengals have won the last 2 games, they still have a playoff pulse, and it'll take them winning out, and it'll take a lot of help. And there's a couple of different avenues they could take, one of which, and probably the most likely, is having them winning out and having Baltimore and Pittsburgh both ending with 8 wins, and somehow they get the division title that way. Another way, though, they could sneak into the back door by winning out, and teams like Miami, Denver, and such also finishing with 8 wins, and the Bengals might be able to sneak into one of those wild card spots if possible. So regardless, it's going to take a win this week, and it's going to take wins going forward. Scott, this one's at home, and ironically, the Bengals have had more success against the Steelers in Pittsburgh under Marvin Lewis than they have at home. But this time around, the Bengals have 2 of their stars. They might not have one of their stars in A.J. Green, but he is supposedly set to practice this week after that slight hamstring tear / pull, whatever is going on there. But let's say he's not back. They still get 2 guys two very impressive guys back this week that they didn't have back in week 2, and that's Vontez Burfict, who was suspended and who has been playing very good football over the past 3 to 4 weeks, and Tyler Eifert, who has done the same and been a very good red zone threat. So we talked earlier about the team's issues against the run this year and Le'Veon Bell coming off an insane day against the Bills. What's the key here? What do you think the biggest key that the Bengals need to do this week in order to win and potentially keep this momentum going through week 17 and maybe even into the playoffs?
Well, I think since we have been talking about, kind of the going for these very astronomical high chances of, hey, we win every game, everyone else loses every game kind of mentality. I think we need something like that. We need insane turnovers, bad penalties, drop passes, kind of the whole gamut. We need all that stuff kind of wrapped together, because a lot of the issues that have led them to being 5-7-1 are still there. We still have some offensive line issues. I know they finally benched Aboihi, but Winston is far from elite. He's been better.
And you saw Fisher in there last week too.
Yeah, and I'd like to say they look better than they did early in the year, but that's still far from it's far from good.
Right.
Bodine has had his best year as a pro, but that's not really saying a whole lot. He's still giving up a lot of pressure inside. I'm guessing Green's not going to play just because if he's not 100%, I don't think they're going to risk it since they have a long-term investment in him and they want to look to the long-term future. So I'm going to guess he doesn't play, and without him playing, that lets your defense. And the Steelers obviously have a better defense than the Browns do. It's going to give them a chance to do what some of the other teams have done against us, which is, okay, you don't have AJ Green in there. We're going to play press. We're going to play up front. We're going to stack the box. We're going to stop AJ Green or stop Jeremy Hill. We're going to force you to throw deep and see if LaFell or Cody Core or someone can beat us one-on-one deep while we're coming after Dalton and not giving it time to throw the ball. So I think offensively they definitely have their hand. It's going to be a big challenge for them because I think the defense is probably going to be focusing on keeping Burkhead and Hill at the line of scrimmage, probably holding them down, and then you get to the other side of the ball, defense, and if they can stop us from moving the ball offensively, all Pittsburgh really needs is 7-10 points, and then we're playing catch up the whole time. We're not able to force them into situations. They can dictate when they run, when they throw. Bell has done very well against us. Amazingly, we shut Antonio Brown down last time, but the odds of doing that back-to-back are possible. Our defense is playing better. I wouldn't expect Pittsburgh to score a ton of points. I just think we're going to have a hard time scoring enough. And you'd mentioned Eifert, and I'd actually looked it up earlier in the week. Eifert has, for whatever reason, has never had a good game against the Steelers. That's one of the teams that even last year when he had his breakout year, his two worst games, I think, were the Pittsburgh games. They just seem to do enough to contain Tyler Eifert. It's doable. I just see a lot of the problems that have been there all year are still there. And Pittsburgh seems to be getting healthy. They have all their starters in, at least at the skill positions. Bell had missed quite a bit. This is his first game since he went out with the injury last year against the Bengals. So you figure he's going to be motivated going up against Burfict, going up against the team that ended his season last year, kept him out of the playoffs. So there just seems to be a lot. It's winnable. I just see a lot of issues that have to be overcome. I'd love to say there's one thing that we can do. I just don't know if I see it.
I will say you bring up Antonio Brown, and that's a great point. I will say that for some of the struggles you've seen from Dre Kirkpatrick and Adam Jones this year, they've actually played very well against divisional receivers. There haven't been too many of this year. They've played the Browns twice, and then the Steelers and the Ravens once apiece. You mentioned Antonio Brown. Though the Steelers won that game, he had 4 catches for 39 yards. Not a big deal in that one. Baltimore, I don't think anybody cracked the 60-yard mark, though Flacco spread the ball around pretty decently. And then much has been made this week about Jones and Kirkpatrick and their great handling of Terrell Pryor, who's kind of become a breakout player of sorts for the Browns. So, you look back to 2015, you see week 8, the Bengals lost that game, but Antonio Brown, 6 catches, 47 yards, did have a touchdown. Again, not that impressive aside from the touchdown there. Another one, he had 7 catches for 87 yards, decent day. And then he did have a pretty good day in the playoff game in the rain, 7 catches for 119 yards, no scores though. So I have an utmost respect for Antonio Brown. I mean, I think if you mentioned like the top 5 wide receivers, AJ Green's in there, as is Antonio Brown. So I have a lot of respect for him, but that's not so much exactly what I'm worried about in terms of what the Bengals need to achieve. I feel like Kirkpatrick and Jones have a pretty good pulse on how to handle some of the divisional receivers, even great ones like Antonio Brown. But we've seen him return punts for touchdowns against the Bengals. We've seen him do all kinds of different things over the past handful of years. He's still obviously a big threat. I think for me, it's always trenches. And we talked about the Bengals giving up 4 sacks against the Browns, who had 19 all year going into last week. That's unacceptable, even though the offensive line did a very good job in the run game. On the flip side, the Bengals had 3 sacks last week, but pressure was kind of inconsistent. They need to be able to get into Ben Roethlisberger, and I know he can kind of, even though he's a bigger guy and he's older, he can still move around and play that backyard brand of football. I think the Bengals need to get in there, hit him, and fluster him, because no matter who you're playing, whether it's Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, or any other great quarterback, if you're able to pressure and sack a quarterback consistently, that's going to be key. And the Steelers' offensive line is pretty good, especially the interior line. They have David DeCastro and Marquise Pouncey is, in that interior of the line. So they've got some good players in there, but the Bengals have some good players on their line too. They just need to have some consistency. And that, to me, the line plays is huge. I mean, you can talk about Le'Veon Bell. I don't see a day, knock on wood, I don't see a day like he had against the Bills with, almost 300 total yards, 220 of which were rushing. So I don't know. I think that the trenches is where this needs to be won. And I think even more so, I think the Bengals offensive line is more important than their defensive line. Do you agree or disagree with that, Scott?
I'm going to say yes, only because if you look at the last 15 games the Bengals have played Pittsburgh, this is something I was looking up because I was trying to allude to it, but I didn't have a number in front of me. The Steelers defense has essentially shut the Bengals down. So they've scored the Bengals have scored 21 points or less every single game for the last 15 matchups. Last year, when their offense was, one of the best ones in the league, we scored 16, 16, and 20. The year before, 16 and 17. We just don't seem to score a lot of points against Pittsburgh. And that's why I was saying, all Pittsburgh really needs is a couple scores. And as much as our offensive line struggled, that could be the game. And so that's why I would totally agree and say, yeah, we need the offensive line has to step up. Winston, Fisher, whoever's in there needs to get protection. Bodine needs to look, at least league average. Zeitler and Bowling have to do their part. Whitworth, they have to play as a full cohesive unit for 60 minutes. No silly penalties. No, getting blown off the ball. No letting backups look like the next Reggie White.
Right.
If they want to have a chance, they need to get some points on the board. Not that we're going to be in a 30 to 40 shootout, but we need to get more than 7 or 10 points.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously you can't, especially at home, you can't score a minimal amount of points against the Steelers and hope for a win there. Do you have a prediction for this game, Scott? Do you have a score prediction?
Not yet, but I'll wing it, and I'm actually kind of relieved I don't have to use a 6.
You don't have to take exactly. I was just going to say extra points hopefully are not going to be an issue.
Now in our for the people who follow us on Cincy Jungle's site, Connor does a weekly post where we pick the games each week. Right now you are in first and I am in second.
Yep.
Like a dozen people. So
if only we put money down, man.
I have a little work to do to catch you. And I think you picked the Bengals, so I picked the Steelers because I need to pick something a little different. If I pick every game you pick, I'm obviously not gaining any ground. So I had to go different. I had to pick Pittsburgh. So I have to stay consistent and give a score that has them winning. So I'm going to say the Bengals 14 and the Steelers 17. I'm going to say it's a very close defensive. I'm giving us 7s for the touchdowns. I'm going to say somehow we probably managed to get a couple. Like I said, Eifert has struggled against them. I don't think Green will be in, and I think they're going to be playing, really tight in the box to shut Hill down. But I think somehow we will manage to get through, score a couple of touchdowns. I just, since I picked them in our staff thing to lose, I have to have a score that has them losing.
So this is the difference between you and I, my friend. You are consistent and you stick to your guns. And anybody who listens to this show and or reads my stuff on the website knows that I waffled last week on the picks, the weekly picks. I picked Cleveland just because I was really freaked out about that game, for right or wrong. I was really freaked out about that game. But then when I did my game preview on Cincy Jungle, I actually picked the Bengals to win. So that way I can't be wrong, really, right? I mean, it's just
because I got a game closer.
There you go. Yep. So one of the things I think that plays into the obviously would play into the Bengals' corner is AJ Green being back, and we talked about him practicing. We'll know more Wednesday when practice concludes, but. Good old Marvin Lewis and his verbiage and the way he talks to the media, he said the Green's chances of playing on Sunday against the Steelers are quote unquote partly sunny. I guess before he had said the week before it was partly cloudy, quote unquote. I mean, whatever. But I think that with the Bengals, with the severity of Green's injury being less than what has initially been thought, knowing the competitor that he is, and knowing the I'm trying to think of the right word here, knowing the magnitude plays, and whether it's start and play all the snaps, whether it's in a limited basis, I think he plays. Then you have him, you have Burfict, you have Eifert back. Even though, as you mentioned, Eifert has not had the greatest of days against the Steelers, I still think if you have him and Green out there, you have Boyd, who's really come alive over the last handful of weeks. I don't know. I think that, again, there's probably a little less pressure now, even though they're still fighting for a playoff spot. There might be a little less pressure than if they were, 9-7 and truly fighting for this game decides the division. And I think the Bengals win this one. I think Burfict has another big day against them, and not in the way of penalties, but I think the Bengals squeak one out. I'll say 20-19. I'll go by a point. 20-19. They're at home. Let's hope that I am right and Scott is wrong, both for the Bengals' sake and my record's sake in the weekly pick.
As long as I would be, obviously I'd be very happy with the Bengals winning. Although if Le'Veon Bell does well, I won't complain because I have him in my semifinal fantasy matchup. So
okay, all right.
He helped me last week. Connor's not here, and I played Connor in the first round, and I think I won like 165-65.
So maybe his issues he came up with were a little bit made up. Maybe they were like, I just can't face Scott this week after he beat me in fantasy.
It was pretty one-sided, and I think I got 40 some points from Le'Veon Bell, which obviously didn't hurt any.
Anyone who had Le'Veon Bell this week, and I experienced this the hard way the week before. Anybody who had Seattle Seahawk anything, defense, Thomas Rawls, anybody had a very good couple of weeks in fantasy football. But I picked the Bengals to win against the Steelers. Scott is not picking them, so you can send a hate mail to Scott's way and make sure that you note his
handle the hate tweets.
Yes, because he is very active on Twitter. No, he's not. Okay, well, before we get out of here, there's one interesting question. It was kind of we tend to do fan questions, and we appreciate. There's been a lot, like I said, a lot of activity in the YouTube chat this week, and we want to hopefully that continues, and we want to make sure that everybody knows that you are invited to join us as we record this show live every week. So please, please, please. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on Twitter, as I mentioned, because that's where we put the link for you to join us. So please do so. But one of the things we talked about in the chat room last week, and one of the things I've been kicking around over the past couple of weeks, unfortunately, for the optimists that really think the Bengals could make the playoffs, again, still a possibility, but for those who are wanting the Bengals to make the playoffs this year, this segment might be a little bit of a sour taste in your mouth because we're talking about the future in the form of the 2017 NFL Draft. Now, one of the things and one of the big caveats to the success of the Dallas Cowboys this year, aside from really good play from a rookie quarterback and a very good offensive line, is they invested a top 5 pick in a running back that they thought could change their franchise. And Ezekiel Elliott, Ohio State product. A lot of Bengals fans are Ohio State fans, so they probably also root for Ezekiel Elliott, except for when he ran all over the Bengals earlier this year. They probably root for him, and he's been playing well. So I kind of wanted to talk. There's supposedly another game-changing running back in the next year's draft, and that's LSU's Leonard Fournette. And he's big, he's quick, he's strong, he can do a lot of different things. He's had a couple of injuries, but I think he's also playing a little cautious because he's got a very potentially lucrative pro career in front of him. We don't know exactly where the Bengals will end up record-wise or slotted in the draft, but if things start to go south this year and they win, maybe they win one more game or maybe they don't win any, they could be within that top 10, top 15 pick range this year. So one of the things we talked about is what if Leonard Fournette fell to the Bengals in the first round? Do you say, potentially game-changing running back? They've got some good guys, but the run game has still been inconsistent. Let me give a little backdrop here, okay? Because there's pros and cons to both, and I want to get your take, Scott. Jeremy Hill has had a very nice bounce-back year. He's on pace for almost 1,000 yards. He's right around 4 yards a carry. He's probably going to hover around 10 touchdowns again. And he, knock on wood, has not fumbled the ball once this year. Okay. And that was a big knock. The yards per carry and the fumbles from last year was a big knock. However, Hill has only cracked the 100-yard mark twice this season, and it was against the Browns both times, which kind of leads you to go, well, unfortunately, that's the Browns. So, do you say, okay, Jeremy Hill still good but inconsistent? Jeremy Hill has a nice bounce back year. You still got Giovanni Bernard coming back next year, but he's coming off knee surgery. You got Rex Burkhead, who's potentially out the door in free agency next year. So there's a lot of moving parts with the running back position, and I think a lot of people really like the duo of Giovanni Bernard and Jeremy Hill, Scott. But if Leonard Fournette is there, even if you need a pass rusher, even if you need even a right tackle, you need a speedy linebacker. If Leonard Fournette is there, especially if he falls 5 or so spots lower than he's projected, If you're the Bengals, do you pounce on him?
I think when I first saw this question, and this might show where my mindset is, the first thing I thought of was purgatory, and the whole idea that there's this thing out there called purgatory, and there's like one definition like what purgatory actually is, and so you could like go to like the Catholic Church or whatever and see what it actually is. There's a lot of people who have this mistaken notion of what it is, and you get like a lot of interesting movies and a lot of interesting descriptions from people who just kind of make up like, oh, here's what I think it is, but don't really know. To me, that kind of reminds me of running backs in the NFL, where there's a lot of people who look at running backs and their statistics and performance and tend to put it a lot more on the running backs than I think it actually is. I think deep down, the true success of a running back in the NFL is the offensive line. If you have a stud offensive line, you're going to have success. We've mentioned Ezekiel Elliott. The year before, Darren McFadden came out of nowhere and I think had like 1,000 yards and 8 touchdowns for the Cowboys. If you put him on the Rams, he probably would have had 400 yards and 1 touchdown. So I think a lot of running back success has to do with how good the offensive line is. And I think if you put Fournette on the Bengals offensive line with the struggles that we've seen from Fisher, from Bodine, from Obuehi, I don't think you'd have the same Fournette that you would have if you had him on the line. The Bengals had 7-8 years ago when Rudy Johnson was rushing for 1,400 yards. And we had guys like Bobby Williams and Willie Anderson, Rich Bram. You get those kind of guys. Yeah, Fournette would be a huge addition. I just unfortunately think with the offensive line we have, I don't know what he'd be able to do, because I still believe I think if we had a better line, I think Hill would be a lot better. If you could give him some initial holes to start out, I think he would have he'd be much more like the Jeremy Hill we saw the second half of his rookie year. So I'd be much more inclined to pass, even if he fell to us. And I'm a big believer of best player available drafting, but within reason. Like I wouldn't take a kicker or a punter in the first round. I wouldn't take a long snapper. I guess I'd have to be convinced that without improving the line, he could be a difference maker. And I don't quite know if he is that guy or isn't that guy. I'd be much more inclined to go after, someone in the trenches, which has kind of been the theme of the episode. So for my money, I'd tend to pass, but just for those reasons.
And they're good reasons. We've got some interesting comments and I'm going to throw out some stats here in just a second, but got some interesting comments in the YouTube chat. Andrew, who we mentioned earlier, says Fournette equals Gurley if behind a bad O line, and we've seen what happened to Todd Gurley as opposed to his breakout rookie year. You have K Rhodes in the chat also agreeing with Andrew on that sentiment. So let me throw out. Okay, so a lot of people, unfortunately, it's been a little bit of a down year for Fournette this year. He's missed a couple of games, but still has cracked this. He's at 6.5 yards per carry this year. He's played 3 years for LSU. And the big year was his sophomore year, in which he played 12 games. He had 300 attempts, 1,953 yards, 6.5 yards per carry, and 22 rushing touchdowns. But you look at his total, and granted, Jeremy Hill has one less year of college football than Leonard Fournette. Jeremy Hill averaged 6.2 yards per carry in 2 years with LSU, and he averaged 14 rushing touchdowns a year with LSU. Fournette is right there. He's at 13.33 rushing touchdowns average in his career, and he's also at a 6.2 yards per carry. So it's not to say that Leonard Fournette isn't better than Jeremy Hill, because he very well could be, and he very well could be more talented. But are you looking at a guy that is more of a Eddie Lacy? I mean, he's not as big as Eddie Lacy necessarily, but is he more of that type of guy, or is he an Ezekiel Elliott type of guy? And this team, we've mentioned, needs speed. It needs wide receiver help probably next year. It needs linebacker help. It needs pass rushing help. again, it kind of comes down to, we talked about this the last couple of weeks, Scott. It comes down to what the Bengals' strategy will be this next year in the draft. Are they going to do what they normally do? Yeah, well, yeah, that exactly. Are they going to do what they normally do, though, and kind of sit on their hands and say, let's let the best player fall to us regardless of position and go from there? And that very well could be someone like Fournette. Or do you think this year they maneuver? Do you think they move up, they move back, collect picks, whatever the case may be, and actually grab more positions of need?
I think it depends on who the coach is next year.
Yeah.
We've kind of assumed Lewis is still going to be there. I think if Lewis is there, they do what they always do, which is they kind of stand pat. Let's say they end with like the 13th pick. They'll kind of sit, wait to see who falls at 13, and do that each round. If they make a trade, they'd probably do what they normally do when they traded down for Zeitler or when they traded down for Chris Perry, where they might trade down a couple spots. I don't see them trading up. Now, if you bring a different coach in, let's say he looks at the team and realizes, hey, we have some pretty good pieces here. We have AJ Green, Andy Dalton, Tyler Eifert, Dunlap, Atkins, Burfict. There's only a couple pieces we need. Let's say we're sitting at 13 and a guy they really want is there at 9. We have those 4 extra compensatory picks, and I think
which you can trade this year. Yeah. You can trade them this year.
So you're looking at your 7 picks plus your 4. So you're looking at 11 picks, and what we've seen, they don't really need 11 players, because half of them are just going to end up on the practice squad anyway. Because if Lewis had him, because they're not going to play. He wouldn't play a first-year guy. So yeah, I could see a different coach packaging them, saying, hey, here's someone we really need. Here's a defensive end that fell. Here's a center in the second round that fell. Whatever it is, that, hey, we need to move up. We need to get this guy. So I think a lot of it depends on who's there. I'd like the more aggressive strategy, only because this is a team that has won for the last 5 years of making the 5 years in a row of making the playoffs up until this year. So they have all those good pieces. Those guys are getting to the point now where they're upper 20s. They're getting way into their second contract, so they're not going to be around forever. Once they hit like that 30 plateau, they're probably going to start going downhill. This is kind of that window, and you still have that window. You still have that chance. We still have a lot of good guys on the roster. If you're going to make a run, I think that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to say, yeah, we have a core here. It's really good. We had a crappy year, but that's a great thing because it's given us a chance to get these good people. Let's do the trades we have to do, move up, get these couple pieces we need, and roll in for next year, and we see what happens.
Yeah, and it's do you want to maybe have the rich get richer in a sense of replenishing that position? Jeremy Hill will still be under contract in 2017, but you have that there's future contract issues that need to be worked out. I mean, you look at and the Tennessee Titans this year aren't dominant, but they are a pretty good team. I believe they're 7-7 at this point or something. And in the mix for the AFC South division race, they drafted Derrick Henry this year, and they made a trade for his name is DeMarco Murray. And so DeMarco Murray's having a breakout year. And though Derrick Henry he's only had 82 attempts on the year, he's still averaging almost 4.5 yards per carry. And you have multiple backs that can do a lot of different things for you. So I think it's probably unrealistic. I think the Bengals obviously think Giovanni Bernard will come back with that knee injury and be okay. And I think they're probably a bit encouraged from what they've seen in a bounce back year from Jeremy Hill. So I don't think Leonard Fournette, if he were to fall to them, unless the Bengals end up having a late pick and it's way down like multiple spots, maybe they would do that just to get the best player available. But I think just with the need of speed at wide receiver, speed at linebacker, get some guys that can rotate in and get to the passer, I just think that they would I would think they would pass on that just from a logical and reasonable type of standpoint. But so over the last couple of years, we didn't think they might take William Jackson III. We didn't, there are guys that they kind of surprised us with a little bit. just because they were the best player on their board. And even though they didn't need that position, they grabbed him. So we'll see. But interesting topic nonetheless. We are going to get out of here, though, and we're going to end on that one. Appreciate all of you who tuned in live and stuck with us tonight. We missed Connor Howe. Unfortunately, he couldn't be with us. And, you know, I appreciate those of you who did tune in live, even though there was a little bit of a schedule change on our end. Scott, I appreciate you not tuning in, obviously, but hosting with me with the schedule change, and appreciate the insight, even though you think that the Bengals will not be victorious this Sunday.
Although I think you had picked that a couple times in the past, so.
I know. I'm just trying to villainize. I'm trying to villainize you and take the onus off of me. You know what I mean? So we'll see. You very well could be right, though. I mean, the Bengals. We all know. Oh, I know. I think everybody hopes you're not right. But even if that even if it means they are or are not going to make the playoffs, I mean, it's just that's a game you just want to win always. And it's Steelers week. For those of you going to the game, let's try and not throw beer bottles onto the field at players if it comes to that. Let's try it.
Flexed out of prime time, didn't it?
It sure did. Yeah, it was supposed to be Sunday night, so that's another thing that plays into the Bengals' corner. It is not on prime time. It is right there at 1 p.m. Eastern. So be safe if you're going to the game. Try not to engage with some of the Steeler trolls that might be there, because there's probably going to be a lot of them. They travel everywhere. And cheer for your team. Root for your team. Root for the Bengals. And let's hope that the Bengals come out victorious. For the Orange and Black Insider, I am Anthony Cosenza. Scott Schulte is my co-host. Again, check us out on Twitter, YouTube. Get in touch with us via email. You can check us out on SoundCloud, and you can also get us on iTunes if I didn't mention that already. And you can also check us out on Cincy Jungle. So please do all of that. We appreciate the support. We appreciate the people who tuned in live. You guys in the chat room were awesome. Let's hope we get some more even in the future as this program grows, which it has been. And Scott, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Who day, buddy?
Who day.